Now that the GMT 2024 errata counter sheet has arrived, I am finally going to attempt to undertake Banish All Their Fears. This is Volume 1 of Bayonet and Musket, Battles of Nervinden, from the War of the League of Augsburg, also known as the War of the Grand Alliance, or the 9 Years' War, potentially, I believe. And also the Battle of Blenheim, which is what I'm going to be playing from the War of the Spanish Succession. I have a keen interest in the War of Spanish Succession right now. I don't know why. It's just learning about Marlborough and the war, and it's pretty interesting. The advent of linear warfare, the era of flintlock muskets, and the sort of changes in technology. There's a great book I just read by Brent Noseworthy about this era and sort of the military tactics on the battlefield and how that changed. This is a game designed by David Fox and Ben Hull. I think probably more David Fox than Ben Hull, and is kind of an evolution of Musket and Pike. So here we have the Battle of Blenheim set up, 1704. This is Marlborough's first great victory. You may find this battlefield familiar because I did do a playthrough of the Blenheim game from Legion War Games. That one is from the 7-hex battle system and was extremely weird. This is another weird one. It does seem that War of Spanish Succession and even late 17th century game designers are finding really interesting and unique ways to represent the advent of linear warfare. This game has had a bit of a mixed reception as far as I understand it. When it first came out, there were a ton of questions about rules and setup and counters, and there were a bunch of counters that were backprinted wrong. So I'm using now the fixed counters from the counter sheet, 2024 errata counter sheet, and also I believe there were some counters in the last year's issue of C3I as well that fixed some other stuff. I remember putting them in here, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, maybe that was Clash of Sovereigns. Anyway, so the game is all fixed. I am using a printed out version of the living rules because there was a whole section missing in the actual release. No idea how that happened. And yeah, when it first came out, there were a lot of questions. The developer was pretty busy on Constant World and Board Game Geek fielding questions and confusions from players. And in general, there was a lot to kind of be very wary about of this game, which is a shame because it's a period that I think deserves more games. And at the tactical level especially, it's quite interesting. So I was giving it some time to kind of come to a boil, as it were, and sort of get itself into the right shape. And now that it is, I would like to play it. I actually read through the rules today. It doesn't appear all that complicated, although putting it into practice might be a little more complex. Now, the one unique thing about this game, first of all, the density of this game is insane. This is the setup for Blenheim. I believe I have it correct, but there are a few questions I do have. So if anyone's watching this, including the developer, it would be great if you could leave some comments down below. The unique thing about this game is this brigade display. So every unit on the map is a battalion. Battalions belong to different brigades. So we can see here that the gendarme brigade is made up of 4 battalions. And then that is reflected over here on the brigade display. This represents your army. And here are the gendarmes here. They're on the very right wing of the Hochstadt Plain sort of command area. So the map is divided into these red lines that represent linear commands. Or linear operating areas, let's call them, where units have to stay within if they're specifically assigned there on the brigade display. And in general, your maneuver is limited by your brigade display in terms of what units are in what line. So you've got 3 lines. You've got the front, the support, and the reserve. Units can, in some cases, move between them. You've also got the order left to right. So here on the far right flank under Clérambault on the front of the French, you've got these 3 brigades. And on the map in this sort of right-hand section, they need to be, all of the units of those brigades cannot go left or right of units of the other brigade here. So there's a lot of interesting movement, positioning considerations that's really going to limit your ability to maneuver because the brigades have to stay in the right order here. And if they're not, they have to come into march order and fix it when they activate again. Now, this is the setup of Blenheim, and if you'll recall, historically, from my other Blenheim playthrough, you've got the Anglo-Dutch allies, including Austrians, Saxons, Germans of all sorts, here attacking this French position across the Nebel River, or Nebel Stream, we'll call it, near the Danube. This was after Marlborough basically stealthily marched like a couple hundred miles really quickly to assist Prince Eugen in his fight against the French. And this is going to be, who is this? It's Marshal Tallard of the French facing off against Marlborough, who the British general. So I think I've set this up correctly. However, the French, I'm doing the historical setup, so you have the option as the French to have a more aggressive setup along the Nebel here. There's a purple line that you can't really see that runs along the stream. You could set up the French in more forward positions to contest the crossing. Historically, they didn't, probably contributed to their defeat in this battle. But with the historical setup, there's a blue line that comes across here and then cuts down like this. Now, because you have to remain in relative correct position, this kind of confused me a bit because everything else goes on the map like this, with the exception of this French deployment zone here, which is this section of the brigade display. So I have set it up that the relative positioning is based on the way that the units are facing front, even though the rules, there's nothing that really explains what happens when you make like a curve in the lines like this. So I am playing it. So if we look at here, we've got the front line, we've got the support line, and we've got the reserve line here. This is easy to understand. You have to be, you have to leave space between the three lines. But if we look at that strictly across the battlefield, here it doesn't make sense if I'm facing in this direction because of this deployment line. Now, I could turn all these facing forward, but then that would make even less sense. And there's actually, I don't think, enough room to get all of the other lines in here. So I've done it so that if they're facing in this direction, this is the front line, this is the support line, and then this is the reserve line. That's the only way I can get it to make sense. The rules don't specifically talk about this situation. I'm hoping someone who's played this game can give me some advice there, because otherwise what would happen is everyone would have to be facing this way, and you'd have just like this stair step effect all the way down, and that would be the front, and then you have this tiny little room, this tiny little 4 hex gap here where everyone would have to be crammed in, and then the reserve line would have to be crammed in down here. Now that may be intentional, but it doesn't seem like that would make a lot of sense. And part of the reason it does this is because the map has been distorted to fit it on one map sheet, which I'm not a fan of. This village of Lutzingen here should be kind of more over here. But we're going to make do. I think it's perfectly playable this way. We'll see how it goes as the battle gets started. Now, as far as the situation, and the other thing about setup, there's nothing in the setup rules for the scenario or the rules of the game that stipulate where the allies have to set up. There are rules about crossing the Nebel, unless I've missed them, but I have read through the playbook several times now. And it seems as though the Allies could literally just set up in the zones of control of the French, or the zones of control, the front hexes of the French just all across the line if they wanted to. I don't know if that's allowed. The rules do make a thing about these causeways across the Nebel, whereby you don't have to spend all your movement to cross the swampy ground there, and also. The French front deployment line is along the Nebel. So I assume, even though it's not stated anywhere, that the Allies cannot set up forward of that purple French forward deployment line, even if the French are using the historical setup. There's nothing that says you can't, so I guess I could just start engaged across the line, but then you wouldn't be using the rules for crossing the Nebel. So I don't know exactly what's going on here. In any case, I have limited myself to setting up the Allies. Basically, they had to set up behind the French forward deployment line. I'm going to assume that's good enough. And we'll go from there. Now, I could move things back, I guess. Like, I'm starting forward of this river line here because the French deployment line is here. So I'm not exactly sure what is allowed or not, but we're going to play with this setup, I guess. There's a lot of interesting concepts in this game in terms of the way that maneuver and combat work. Like musket and pike, you're going to give your brigades orders, and based on the orders you give them, that will determine the activation order. And when you move into combat, you'll roll some dice. We'll get into that as we play. So the Allies are trying to force the French position. Oh, by the way, the way you win is you eliminate one wing of the army. So any one of these 5 sectors, if all the units are routed or eliminated, then I believe you win. So the French are in a more defensive position. The Allies are attacking. There's this, this kind of swampy river between the two armies. This village is on fire. You're not allowed to enter that. And so is this village here. Not allowed to enter those hexes. It looks like there's a couple more. Fire, yeah. The French set those on fire. So you can't go into those hexes. That is... essentially, the situation here at Blenheim, it's going to be, it's going to be a lot of dice rolling, I feel like, and we'll see how it goes. I did try and set it up in a way that's going to bring interesting situations. The French have a large cavalry force here in the middle across these plains. I think just waiting for the Allied cavalry to cross here. I believe historically what happened was there was an assault here to pin the French around the village of Blenheim. Prince Eugen, his forces came across this way and attacked down in this direction. And then the center was contested, and Marlborough used a little bit of combined arms. He supported his cavalry here with infantry, which you can see is set up like this. And they were able to drive the French from the field in that way after they captured and surrendered a whole bunch of brigades here in the town of Blenheim. So we'll see how it goes. This is going to be an exploratory jaunt through this game. I'm excited to play it finally, and I really love this period of history, so I'm hoping that I enjoy this game more than the internet would make it seem like I would. And it should be noted that Volume 2 of this series is called Over the Hills and Far Away. That is Volume 2 of Bayonet and Musket. That's also got 2 battles in it. I think Romilly is in that one. That's the War of Spanish Succession battle. I think it's Romilly or Oudenarde. I can't remember. Anyways, it's another Marlborough victory. And so if I like this, then I will go on P500 that. And if I don't like this, then I will not. But I do think now that the rules are cleaned up, it deserves a spot on the table. And here we go. Well, I got my answer about the setup in the official errata for the game, which came from a BGG thread that was buried on the Banish All Their Fears forums. So the answer about the setup for the Allies is that they have to start north of the Nebel, which is this, and that's going to bring up another question that I'm going to ask in a second, and they cannot be adjacent to the forward French setup line. So I have moved the formations back. They're all legal. I also was missing some artillery on both sides when I was reading the setup instructions that I missed, and I forgot that artillery can shoot through one friendly unit. So I've actually backed some of my artillery batteries, let's actually do that now, off the front of the line so that they are not in danger because they can actually fire through, these British artillery can fire through these Dutch units. Excuse me. So I'll make sure that my artillery is in a safe spot, because if artillery are ever on top of the stack or alone and they get attacked, they're just eliminated. So we don't want that to happen. Now there's one area, which is this little wedge here, the Oberglau strong point sort of division wing of the army, that does have 2 artillery batteries in it, and this town is blocking line of sight. So I put one here on the edge to shoot this way, and the other one, there's not a really good spot for it because of the way this is set up based on the historical setup. I could put it out front here across the river, or in front of the town to fire, but I decided that I was going to stick it on top of this unit here, thinking that I'm going to lose it when the Danes get close enough to attack. But looking at the Allied setup here, they don't have a lot of units actually in this sector. It's a very thin wing, and so even if these Danes do cross the Nebel and engage in fighting, I'm willing to let that artillery unit go for the ability to fire a couple times at the Danes. I don't think that the Allies are going to want to press this line of attack anyways. This is a pretty strong point there. When I was looking at the map, I was looking at sort of what the strategy for the Allies might be. And historically what happened is Marlborough, so he let Prince Eugen get into formation with his cavalry over here. That's where you see all this cavalry. They made an attack that forced the French to divert some units over to this flank of the army. And then he launched an attack here repeatedly against Blenheim, the village of Blenheim. The French poured defensive units into it. Eventually, at the end of the day, he was able to surround it, but it was really in the center where, depleted from the center, the brigades of the French army were fending off the two pincers that the Allies, I believe, were able to make progress and come through here, surround the town, cross the Nebel, and win the day. And so that is kind of what happened. I'm also noticing that on this flank, we've got some Prussian and Danish infantry that are actually quite good, or pretty good. You know, there's not a lot over here for the French to defend. I might actually, when I set this up, I might move these guys out a little bit just to prevent a flanking situation. But as you can see, if we can make slow progress over a couple turns through these woods, the Prussians might be able to get the better of the French left flank here. And I feel like this is actually the one place in the French line that is pretty exposed or pretty weak. And so with all of the good infantry, we got good Danish infantry over here, good Prussian infantry, we could actually potentially win the battle over here. So I might rejigger the French setup a little bit. The one question I had about the Nebel, so obviously we know the Allies have to start north of the Nebel. They can't be adjacent to the French purple setup line for the aggressive deployment. The problem is what happens to the Nebel here? This splits into two tributaries. Are one of these considered the Nebel? They're not labeled as such on the map. And so I don't know if we're considering this the Nebel, or we're considering this the Nebel, or we're considering this the Nebel. I had to make a call here, and I decided I would consider this the Nebel, because you can see the French deployment line comes all the way down here. So I'm considering this to be the Nebel, I guess, for purposes of deployment. So I'm starting north of there. Originally, I had these guys pushed forward across that stream, but we're going to say that they can't start there, I guess. Again, weird map projection here. This town should actually be kind of up here, so it would be more of a straight army line. So there we go. Let's get into gameplay. We're going to start turn 1. All right, so the first phase of the turn is the artillery phase, and this is where we do all of our artillery activity. Artillery on each side are allowed to unlimber, move, or limber. And all of that's done simultaneously. When artillery want to fire, it alternates back and forth, starting with the player with the most artillery. Now, in this scenario, both sides have the same number of artillery batteries. Artillery is actually quite simple. They can fire up to a range of 7. You roll a die. If the artillery has pivoted before it fires, which it's allowed to do, it fires at -1. And artillery in this game is really interesting. You actually don't cause casualties. You cause disruption for the hex or unit that you're firing at. And you can actually fire at empty hexes. So you can see here, if you get an artillery hit, which is the gray circle, cause plus movement points to enter or leave that hex. It causes units that are in combat to have 1 less combat strength, no rallying or recovering in dress ranks. And if you fire at artillery, they get a -2 die roll when they fire. And if you get a artillery effective marker on a hex, it prevents all movement, -2 combat value, and may not fire. So as you can see, as you get closer, it's a little more likely that your fire is effective. That's a really interesting system here. And because we both have our artillery in the starting locations that we want them to be in, we are going to roll to see who gets to shoot first. So red is the Allies, gray is the French. The French are going to get to go first. They've got artillery along the line. So let's do an artillery attack. Let's get the player aid out properly. Let's go ahead and do... let's see. What do we want to do? We probably want to hit the Allied artillery. That's going to be the real key here, I think, early in the game. Prevent the Allied artillery from causing disruptions along the line. So we'll start here. We're going to target that artillery, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No, we can't quite reach it. That's unfortunate. Okay. Well, in that case, I guess let's target the Danes here in front. We'll target that unit right there. We're going to shoot. That is, how far away is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exactly 7. We rolled an 8. That's a really good roll. And that is going to be an artillery hit, which is kind of unexpected, actually. So we drop an artillery hit here. And then we are going to go to the Allied side. Now, the Allies probably want to do an artillery... Oh, and then we flip the counter to show that we have fired with that artillery unit. We probably want the Allies here. They've got some pretty good artillery superiority. Let's see if I can find where their batteries are. They are over here in the center. So, well, there's no artillery within range that we can hit given my positioning of this. I guess maybe I could have put one over here, but do I want to change that setup? It would be nice to get a battery able to fire into Blenheim. So yeah, let's put a battery there. Okay, we're gonna fire with that one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can hit any of these gendarme battalions here, and I think what we want to do. Let's see. I'm probably not gonna be able to get across the Nebel this turn. Well, I might be able to with the causeway. Well, okay, we'll just go ahead and fire here at these gendarmes on the road. So we're going to roll, and let's see. Let's count the range again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We rolled a 1. That's going to be a miss. So that was ineffective. And then we're just going to go back and forth. And when that's all done, and then we're going to move on to the next phase of the game, which is the wing activation phase. It's where we can use our wing leaders to swap battalions forwards and backwards, side to side, stuff like that. Probably not a lot going to happen on the first turn with that, but I'll show you when we get there. So the next phase of the turn is the wing activation phase. This is where we can move brigades around on the brigade display that would then have to be reflected on the battlefield. Here are all of the actions you can take. You can commit a brigade by moving it up in line. You can exchange front brigades with support line brigades. You can exchange support and reserve lines. You can exchange places with adjacent brigades. You can move brigades to another wing. There's some die roll modifiers. You roll against your leader in that brigade. And yeah, so I don't know that there's anything I necessarily want to do in that regard here, because most of the front lines of my brigades, well, the one I could do for the French is the Lutzingen-Oberglau Gap. There's room for one more brigade there. That is this sector of the battlefield, but I don't feel the need, there's no room right now to do that. And on the Allied side, most of the front lines here are pretty stocked. If we're looking at the thing full there, there's room for 2 in here, but because of the town on fire, there's not a lot of room to get those units into position. We want to cross the Nebel first before we start messing with that. There's room to bring up these Danes in this sector, but again, no room here in the front unless I want to start stacking units, which I don't want to do. And over here, we could bring up a brigade in this sector. This would be the only one where I think it might be useful, but yeah, and there's just too much overlap. I want to get these guys moving before I do that. So we're just going to skip that section of the turn, and now we're going to go to the meat of the game, and that's the brigade activation phase. So the way this works is similar to the other game that this shares some DNA with. I want to call it pike and shot. Musket and pike, thank you. Musket and pike. So the brigade activation phase. So all brigades, the way this works is any brigades that are under charge orders, which right now there are none, would get to go first. And the player who has more brigades under charge orders would go first, and then you'd alternate back and forth till all the brigades under charge have gone. Charge is the only way you can attack in this game. That causes the brigades, all their units, to move forward towards an enemy, towards sort of the closest priority enemy, and then attack and fire, engage in combat. Then there are none of those, so then the next thing that happens is we go to march orders. This scenario, all brigades start under march order, and so who goes first here? I think it's the one with more brigades under march order. I'd have to count up the total number of brigades to see who has more. I think it's probably going to be the Allies. When I activate a brigade, I can attempt to change their orders, so I could change from march to dress ranks or march to charge. Then they will move. Then if there's combat and they're able to combat, they will have combat. Then any brigade that had a unit rout has to check their morale. And this is where you can get things like, so a brigade's morale is represented by this number in the bottom right. You have to roll that number or less on a D10. However, every unit that is routed in the brigade acts as a negative modifier to that value. So the more units in the brigade that rout, the more likely the entire brigade is to routing. And again, victory is going to be based on routing an entire wing of the army of one side or the other. And then we're just going to alternate back and forth. And so this is going to be the meat of the turn where all of these brigades are going to take turns going back and forth. If there were then brigades under dress ranks, they would get to take actions. And dress ranks is how you're going to restore sort of unit cohesion, restore hit points. Let's see if I can find the player aid. Oops, sorry for that. Here. So there's 3 order types in this game, unlike the 4 from Musket and Pike. If you're in dress ranks, when you're activated, you can move forward or backwards 1 hex, keeping your facing. You can change facing up to 2 vertices. You can flip cavalry over to their undisorganized side. Infantry units can gain casualties, and you may attack if you start adjacent to an enemy that is under a charge order. So there's always the chance to counterattack if you're facing enemy units who are charging you. I am going to count up the number of brigades that everyone has, and then we're just going to start going back and forth, and I'm not going to show you how all of that works. The rules you need to know. It takes the entire movement of an infantry unit to cross the Nebel, and they have to start next to it, so it's going to be slow going here. I'm going to try and probably push these cavalry first because this is a minor river, not the Nebel, and we're going to have some cavalry engagement. So I would have to put them into charge order for that, and I have to see if they can even make it with a charge order. If a unit cannot execute its maneuver like a charge and get into within range of an enemy, then they will be considered to have a move order and or a march order. And a march order cannot attack on their turn, so that makes kind of sense. So I'll show you what happens after I do all of or at least the initial brigade activations. All right, so we're going to have our first close combat here. The Dutch came in across these causeways here. This is Holstein-Beck's brigade. They were under a march order. You're allowed to get next to an enemy under march order, but you cannot attack, so they moved in. Then we activated Massenbach here with the French, and I attempted to do an order change with them. Because now that the Dutch are here, and I know they've already activated, there's no downside to me trying to fire on them and possibly attack, although they do have better units, but my flanks are protected. And you can see here I've got 2 units stacking. So in this game, it looks like some Swedes there, Holstein Beck, and some Dutch. So when you're stacking in this game, it's 2 units of a single type. If you have an open flank, the unit on the bottom is actually kind of off to the side protecting the flank, while this unit is facing forward, like that. So it's kind of notional. But if for some reason I did have a unit on my flank here, then that unit in the back is simply behind this front unit and actually inhibits its retreat. So you really only want to stack units on the end of a line where you need flank protection. This, if you watch my Battles of the Age of Reason videos, this would be kind of the equivalent of like a hook formation in some regards. But now we're going to do infantry combat. So when you're in combat with infantry, you are, I believe you have the option in certain situations, but in this case, I don't think we do. So you have to declare your attacks. And you can't 2-on-1 if there's another unit you can attack. So this Massenbach unit has to attack here, and this Massenbach unit has to attack here. The very first thing you do is you flip the units to use their initial volley, their initial musket volley. And you have to do this, I believe, when you're fighting infantry. So we flip them both over. That immediately causes a step loss to the front unit in each stack. And you say, well, why would you do that? Well, one of the things in this game that you're trying to do is use your initial volley, then get those units out of the way, bring up fresh units, get a chance to use their initial volley to do a hit, an automatic hit to units that have already expended their volley. So you can do more. And a unit has a number of hit points equal to its combat value. So as you can see here, the Lviv battalion of Massenbach has 1 more hit it can take before it's going to rout. Faronaise has 2. The Dutch also have 2. So pretty good initial volley, the first gunfire of the thing. And then we're gonna roll on the infantry versus infantry combat table, which is right here. And so it's a differential in combat value. So let's start with Faronaise there on the left against Gur from Holstein Beck. It's 2-2. So we'd be rolling on this 0+0 column. If you have a leader in direct command of a brigade here, which, as you can see, we don't. I've notionally have Talar and Churchill's brother here kind of commanding the wing, but not commanding a particular brigade. This is where you can get combat value out of your leaders, but they might die. If you're attacking through a flank or rear hex side, if you are attacked through a flank or rear hex side, you would increase or decrease your combat value as required. So that's it. I mean, that's all the die roll conditions that you're going to have for a combat, so pretty simple. And then if there's open flanks, and in this combat there is, the Dutch do have an open flank there on their right. However, if the attacker has no open flanks and the defender does have an open flank, increase the attacker's CV by 1 for each of the defender's open flanks. So normally we would get +1, so it would actually be on the +1 column for this attack. And normally we would get that. However, like I mentioned, we are having our flanks protected by our buddy unit underneath Holstein Beck's Sturler. So they are notionally defending this flank from behind, sort of in a hook. So there's going to be no modifiers, and we're just going to roll the French attack. It's going to be +0, and they rolled a 5. It's literally a perfectly even attack. So we'll see what happens on a 1-to-1. So if we look at the +0 and we have 5, we get firefight. So a firefight is that little marker there. We're actually going to put that on the units. This means that we've kind of got sort of a breakout of uncontrolled musket fire between the units. And that actually will lock these units into place until either one of them decides to dress ranks and retreat, or we can get another unit to attack one of those units and drive them off. So they're just going to be, and they're not allowed to do anything anymore while that firefight marker is there. So those units are busy firing at each other back and forth, and that is going to be kind of the end of their fight until something changes. Now let's go to this one, Massenbach versus, I keep trying to read it upside down, Rechteren. That's a really bad Dutch accent. So we are -1 on this particular... We're -1 on this particular attack. So that's not great, but we did declare it, so we have to do it. There are no die roll modifiers to this. You know, I'm looking at this right now. This is D. That means disorganized, I believe. Oh. You know what? These are infantry units attacking cavalry, or these are cavalry units attacking infantry. There's some special rules about that. Okay, so scratch everything I just said. That was a little practice combat had we been fighting infantry versus infantry. But that did not happen. There is no firefight because these are cavalry units. And so we're only allowed to have cavalry attack infantry in order if either we are through their flank or rear, or we're trying to get them to deplete their opening volley. And in this case, if we look at Massenbach here, it says cavalry on the brigade counter. So you're going to want to make sure that you're looking at your units properly. Cavalry here are sort of organized into these squadrons with a little line down the middle. You got cavalry here in 3 ranks, cavalry there in 3 ranks. Infantry are going to look like the Dutch here in sort of a continuous line formation. So be very careful about your about what units you're looking at. I do wish, this other people who have reviewed this game have talked about the readability of the counters and the graphic design here. I do wish there was some indication on the counter, the counter themselves, of what kind of unit they are, because you end up making mistakes like this. What I ended up catching was that there's a disorganized side on the back of cavalry, and the initial volley side of the infantry, those have sort of a number on the back that represents how many casualties they've taken, I believe. I'll double check on what that means. But in this case, we're still going to go ahead and do the attack. So the cavalry are attacking the infantry because these guys had their initial volley. The infantry are forced to use their initial volley. When that happens, the cavalry is disordered and has to retreat 1 hex. So we're going to do that. And that is the end of the combat. No die roll required. So you get a little bit of how this is all going to work out. If for some reason we had managed to attack these infantry in the flank, there is a table for cavalry versus infantry, which is right here. And, you'd be allowed to do that. But in this case, it was not allowed. And in fact, if I bring this over, you can see that when you charge attack, you have priority hexes that you must attack. So you can see the cavalry here had to attack into its front hexes. And you get momentum bonus if you're attacking someone who's 2 to 3 hexes away, depending on what year we're in. Now, we're in 1704, so French cavalry only gets a bonus if they're charging at 3 hexes for momentum. But in either case, we have deprived these Dutch battalions of their opening, their initial volley. And so that may be good, it may be bad. I guess, strategically we'll see what kind of comes of me doing that. But I do have now this French cavalry here, who's a pretty good, the Royal Battalion with a 4, and I believe they might be able to attack in the flank next turn. We had our first cavalry skirmish of the battle. So we had the Fugger, the Austrian Fugger Brigade, move up across this stream, kind of in a line here. Then the French Vivian Brigade decided that they were going to try and change to a charge order because they were within 2 hexes of the Fugger units, and that would have given them a +1 on their combat value with a charge. They succeeded, and then they charged because they had to, and they charged against this line of Austrian cavalry. These 2 attacks here did nothing, just disordered the units. You can see here there was a covered flank by I was looking through the rules. You don't consider flanking for cavalry attacks, and I don't know if that means you don't consider them for modifiers to the dice or combat value, or you don't consider them at all. But it does say that you can cover the flanks if you're stacked cavalry units together. It's a little confusing. I know for infantry how it works, but for cavalry it seems to be a little weird middle gray area. In any case, I believe this unit could have covered this flank, and so the top unit retreated. However, this attack here was so impactful and successful, it actually eliminated the Fugger Austrian battalion here. That became this route marker. That unit routed. That disordered this unit when it routed through there. He got to advance. He made an attack against this guy. He failed, had to fall back, and this cavalry had to advance from that. So now this Durlock battalion is separated from his... from the rest of his brigade. So they're going to have to get back into compliance when they activate, and I'm probably just going to move these 2 guys forward to get back into compliance there, because I could not have a charge order if the brigade integrity is not respected. So we have our first action here, the French sort of counter-charging the Prince Eugen's Austrian advance. We'll see how that continues to play out. I'm setting up to do it again next turn with Natsmer here. The risk is that Natsmer could actually hit this guy in the flank. So that would be pretty devastating if he's able to pull that off. All right, now the last thing we do before this activation is over is if any of these brigades lost a unit, which the Fugger unit did here, we have to make a morale check. If we fail the morale check, this entire brigade is going to rout, meaning all 3 of these units are just going to run away. That would be very bad. I do not want that to happen. The morale of the brigade is 6, but we've lost 1 unit, so it's 5. So I need to roll 5 or less. And I rolled a 9. So we're off to a very bad start here with Prince Eugen's cavalry charge. All 3 of these units become Route 1 and go back 2 hexes. Goodbye. Goodbye. And this one's going to go there. Goodbye. And just like that, we have lost an entire formation who didn't get a chance to do anything because of French cavalry countercharge. They saw one of their battalions get mowed down by Fourquevaux, and they just turn tail and run. So these markers are going to stay on the map for 2 turns. They're going to continue to route backwards. And if they move through units, they'll cause casualties or disorder. Thankfully, there's an open channel there. But wow, that's a really bad way to start this particular game for the Austrians and the Allies. We are done with the first turn, the 1220 to 1240 turn of the game. Trying to just get the repetitions in to get the rules down. It's not too bad. There's actually not a lot of activity that you can do a lot of times because you're just jammed up with traffic on the battlefield. I've tried to move some stuff. And most importantly, I tried to move some stuff here. So these routed units, which it's their phase right now to move, so they're going to move. The routed markers have a movement point value of 4, and they're going this way. So we would go 1, 2, 3, and then it can't cross. There's not enough movement points. So once it's done moving, flip it to its 2 side. It's going to move again. It does cause casualties or disorder if it moves through units, so it likely will do that next turn. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I'm going to have to figure out a way to try. I was trying to get these guys out of the way because I see the Fugger Brigade like running this way. And according to the rules, I don't believe when you become routed from a morale check that the routed markers move to... Oh, this should have been taken away. Move 2 hexes. There's some scenarios where situations where the rules say it should move 2 hexes when it becomes routed, and when it does as a result of a failed morale, it doesn't. So I'm not sure there. So I didn't move them 2 hexes, but 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So and then these get flipped over to 2, and then next turn they'll do that again, and then they'll come off the map. So you only get 2 turns of routing units before they're all dispersed behind the lines. You can never bring these back, by the way. They just represent units eliminated by morale or route that are interfering with your plans. I did manage to put Durlock into dress ranks here and get that cavalry disorder back, restore brigade integrity. I just kind of generally move the lines forward. I'm trying to get set up for next turn to attack across now, especially now that these guys are disordered. The French, hopefully, well, I think they're in, are they in charge? They're in charge, so they'll get to go first. They can actually try and change to dress ranks. That will allow them to back up or recover. Probably recover is probably the better idea there. And then here, we had some of the French cavalry just kind of push forward and, or here, we had the gendarmes push forward and just caused the infantry to use their initial volley to just degrade their combat ability. We want to get the gendarmes into dress ranks next turn as well, recover, move back. We're just trying to slow down the advance. What I'm really going to have to do as the Allies is I'm going to have to cross this river. I'm going to have to do some combats as much as possible. The infantry can kind of bully the cavalry. So once I get into a charge order, I can just attack and the cavalry have to retreat, I believe. And once I do that, I can sort of bring the rest of these across as they historically did. And I just want to kind of push this cavalry back and just kind of get into a position here where I can like close the door on Blenheim. And I don't really want to push super hard, but I'm going to have to do some. And the French have made it a little bit tricky. They have some dragoons out here on the right wing. That moved forward through this swampy ground to block the crossing here by these Hessians, these Hessian Grenadiers, the Wilkie Brigade. They have to be careful, though. The reason they all advanced instead of just these two, this is going to be a difficult attack across if we can get Wilkie into charge orders. The problem here is that Row can also cross this river this turn, and then so they've got to protect their flanks. There's an open flank here, so that's going to be problematic for them. And I don't want to leave the safety of the town with greater. And I'm just looking real quick at the brigade sheet. It looks like I could attach cuts to Wilkie here to make that attack somewhat less bad, which actually might be a good idea. It does put cuts at risk of being killed, but maybe I want to force my way across there. I don't know. We'll come back to this as we continue playing. But yeah, so that's the first turn. There's no victory, obviously, on this turn. And then during the cleanup phase, the last thing you do is you remove artillery hits. So I'm going to go through and pull off all the artillery hits. You're going to flip artillery back to their front side to be able to fire or limber next turn. The brigade sheet all needs to be flipped back from finish to ready, which is kind of annoying. And then any routed 2 markers would get removed from the board. And then we'd advance the turn, and we would go into the 1240 turn of the game. I'm going to call this video here. This is a kind of a first look as I fumble my way through learning this really unique system. I have to say, as I'm coming to grips with it, I am slowly becoming a fan of it. We'll have to see if that continues. It is a very slow-moving game. Not a lot of stuff changes. As you can tell, the lines still pretty much look the way they are. But I'm going to push on and continue and see if we can get to the end of the Battle of Blenheim. The next video, I will probably move a lot quicker, showing you just kind of the major actions, major developments. You don't need to see all of my 1-hex moves and dice rolls, that's for sure. And so yeah, so I hope you're enjoying this. I will, when this series is over, probably going to be two parts, 2 videos. I am going to do sort of an exploration of where this game fits in sort of our games about the Age of Enlightenment as a follow-up to that video I did about those 5 or 6 games we looked at or late last year. And also I'm going to compare this Battle of Blenheim to Legion War Games' Blenheim. And we're going to talk about how these 2 games compare and which one might be the right one for you. So I hope you'll stay tuned for that content as soon as I make my way through this very dense and yeah, pretty fun game.